The Labour Party has proven its extremist credentials again, as Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell calls Winston Churchill a villain. There's really no point in the Labour Party trying to hide its extremism anymore. I mean, it's blatantly obvious. They've got Hamas-loving Jeremy Corbyn as its leader, they've got anti-white racist Diane Abbott as Shadow Home Secretary, and of course they've got Churchill-hating John McDonnell as the Shadow Chancellor. Is it any wonder that this mental party is slipping in the polls? During an interview with Politico, McDonnell was asked a number of quick-fire questions, and the first question was, who's your favourite Tory? A nice sort of jolly question to start with, but he just refused to answer it. It's pretty typical, really. This shows that he's a man who hates people who simply don't agree with him, anybody who thinks differently. And then he was asked what he thought of Winston Churchill. Specifically, he was asked whether Winston Churchill was a hero or a villain, and there was an awkward pause.
Winston Churchill, hero or villain?
Tony Pandy, villain.
What you just heard him say, though, was Tony Pandy, villain. McDonnell was referring to a miners' strike that happened in the village of Tony Pandy, and it was a strike that became quite serious when mine workers found out that the mine owners were planning on bringing people in from outside the area to operate machinery. And it got so bad that the local authorities had to contact the Home Office, and Winston Churchill, as Home Secretary at the time, agreed that 200 police officers and some troops would be sent in to deal with the matter. One miner died and hundreds of people were injured. It was pretty nasty. Not putting blame on either side here, of course. It's just one of those horrible historical events that happened. It's not a very nice story, obviously, but is McDonnell obviously suggesting that Churchill wanted people to die or something? Or did Churchill want miners to die? I mean, obviously that's nonsense. As Home Secretary at the time, he had to do something. It's a sad fact that human society results in conflicts like this, and they're not always easily solved. And yes, Churchill would probably not be accepted these days for a lot of the things that he used to say and do, but we seem to be forgetting something. Let me tell you a little story about a time when Germany went a bit mental. Millions of Jews died. I don't know if you knew this. An authoritarian power was sweeping across Europe. Did you know? Winston Churchill rallied the troops and fought for Britain, and guess what? We won. Ever heard of that story? Because it's disgraceful that modern politicians can get away with calling people like Winston Churchill villains. This is surely only, there's only so long that the Labour Party can continue saying crazy things like this and just getting away with it somehow. How is it that extremism's just become the new normal in the Labour Party? And let's not forget, this is the official opposition of Her Majesty's government. People who are privileged to be in Westminster saying terrible things like this. And by the way, this isn't a one-off thing, because a former advisor to Jeremy Corbyn once said on Twitter that we shouldn't glorify Churchill. He said, "Darkest hour? Churchill had so many. His use of chemical weapons in Palestine and Russia among them. I'm sure Gary Oldman gave a fine performance, but I'll pass on any film glorifying a man who British voters rejected at the first opportunity." Being Jeremy Corbyn's former advisor, I think it's a bit rich talking about being rejected by the voters. But need I remind this man about a person called Adolf Hitler? And by the way, do you remember that time when a load of left-wing activists burst into this British-themed cafe called the Winston Churchill Cafe, and they started ranting and raving about racism and how Churchill was evil? Well, Jeremy Corbyn might well have attended that cafe a couple of times before, but he refused to condemn what happened and the things that those students said when they went into that cafe. Every other significant politician did reject and condemn what was said about Churchill by these lunatics in this Churchill Cafe, but Corbyn was weirdly silent. Are you surprised by this? Labour is, at this point, a force for extremism. The party is riddled with anti-Semitism. It despises our war heroes, and they just want us to forget our proud history. I, for one, won't be doing that. And I'm not afraid to say that Winston Churchill is a hero. We're not funded by the government, we don't have big sponsors, and we certainly don't have massive donors. If you'd like to help support our work, please go to rebeldonations.com/thebuck.